y'all, Dixie here. Now I want to cover some common injuries / afflictions that thru-hikers might experience and a basic minimalist first aid kit for some of those situations. Just a disclaimer, I am not a doctor and this is not medical advice, but I will say that when you first start the trail, you're gonna be really sore. I had never been so sore in my entire life, but after a while I started to tune into my body and I knew what was normal sore and also what just didn't seem right. So I would say trust your gut, and if you think that you're injured, then it would be worth it to seek help from a medical professional. Let's start off with blisters because that's one of the first things I remember people complaining about. Now you may know that you're blister prone already, or you might find out the hard way on trail, but the best thing that you can do for blisters is prevention. I feel like a lot of blisters can be prevented with good hygiene and foot care. So taking your shoes and socks off in the middle of the day when you take a break is a great idea. Let those bad boys air out and dry out, and I also like to put my socks and shoes in the sun. Some people even say that switching out their dirty socks or socks that they were wearing in the morning to another pair for the afternoon does them a world of good, just not having that same salt buildup throughout the whole day. To go the extra mile, you could even rinse out those socks that you wore the first half of the day and let them dry hanging on your pack the remainder of the day while you're wearing that second pair of socks, and just keep doing that rotation. It also doesn't hurt to rinse your feet off with some water while you're taking a break, but just make sure you let them dry out really well before putting socks back on and continuing to hike. There are some products like Body Glide that you can rub on your feet to help reduce the friction on them, and then also certain socks that claim to help with blister reduction, like in Gingy. If you're somebody who gets blisters between their toes, then having that material rub on itself rather than the skin of your toes rubbing together can also prevent blisters. Now, if you get past the point of prevention, the next best thing is early detection. If something doesn't feel quite right on your foot, or a certain spot feels warm, you have a hot spot thing going on, stop right there on the trail and check into that. Don't say, well, it's only 2 more miles to the shelter and I'll deal with it then, because you might go from just a red irritated spot to a full-blown gross blister by the time you get to camp. When you stop to take a look, if it is in fact a hot spot turning into a blister, then do something to take the friction off of that. Maybe some moleskin to put over the area, even duct tape if you have to use that, but you definitely want to change something up so it doesn't continue to rub in that same spot. And finally, if we've gotten way past all of that, then you've got to look at treatment of the blister. It's good to have some antibiotic ointment on hand. You can get like the little single servings of Neosporin or something like that. You can even take some Q-tips and cut them in half and shove them down in a mini Ziploc bag with some Neosporin for easy application. But if you don't have anything like that, try to clean the area up as much as you can with water, if you've got any soap or baby wipes, or even hand sanitizer. Now, people will argue till the cows come home as to whether you should pop a blister or not. I think it's up to the individual. It's your foot and it's your blister, and if you want to pop it, then go for it. I will say that I have seen instances where, yes, people have popped a blister and it got infected and they weren't in a great situation, but I've also seen instances where there was a small blister that didn't seem too problematic. They didn't pop it and it continued to spread into a huge fluid-filled blister, taking up like a good portion of their foot. So really, I think you have to monitor it and do what's best for you, but before you pop it, make sure you clean it really well, and also whatever you're popping it with, a needle, pin. I have run them through the flame of my ladder before and also put some hand sanitizer on them. You could boil them in your food pot too, but make sure that it's clean. That way you're preventing infection as much as you can. Some people even swear by threading a needle and thread through the blister. So you would take it kind of parallel with your foot and leaving that thread in there for the night. And they say that the thread helps wick that fluid out of there. Don't know if it really works like that or not, but something to think about. Next up is Achilles tendonitis. This is one of the first injuries I was plagued with on trail. I had probably overworked my Achilles anyway, never backpacking before, not doing any training before I went out to trail, and loading all this weight on my back and trying to climb mountains. But in addition to that, my boot was drumming on my Achilles tendon and caused it a lot of irritation. Switching to trail runners definitely helped me with this problem, but I did at some points continue to overwork that Achilles and it would flare up. But thankfully, most of the time I was able to keep it at bay, and I was able to do so enough to finish my hike. So if you find yourself in this situation, there are some things you can do to try to help. First, if at all possible, rest. And this is why it's good to start the trail a little bit earlier than you think that you will need to, so that you've got time if issues come up like this. If you can take a 0 or 3 in trail, whatever your body needs to rest, elevate that leg and let it heal up, then that's the best thing you can do. Although I know how it is to feel that itch to push on, sometimes if you push too much and you don't listen to your body and rest, then it can end up ruining your hike. Ibuprofen or some other anti-inflammatory. On the trail, it's not really possible to ice your tendon. Once you get to town, that would be a great idea. But while you're on trail, if you can find a cold spring or creek to put your foot in, then that should help more than doing nothing. Also, stretching can help. You don't want to overdo it, especially if it's freshly injured, but as a routine to go forward and help prevent injury, stretching is great. Plantar fasciitis. That sounds like a scientific name for some flower or something, but it's actually the band that runs along the bottom of your foot. And if you pull your toes back and feel something tighten up right there, that's your plantar fascia. When it gets pissed off, it becomes plantar fasciitis because you've got inflammation of the plantar fascia. I was plagued with this about the time I hit Pennsylvania on the AT, but thankfully with several different remedies that I tried, I was able to clear it up most of the way and finish the trail. First, I got a new pair of trail runners and replaced the insoles with Dr. Scholl's for plantar fasciitis, which felt wonderful on my plantar fascia. Rolling your foot with a ball can also help work out some of the pain from plantar fasciitis. I bought a set of the game jacks in town and tossed the jacks but kept the ball. And I would stand up and then roll that ball between my foot and the ground just to work it out. When I was in the first stages of dealing with the plantar fasciitis, I would stop every 2 to 3 miles or so, prop my feet up, take a break, and I'd have one propped up while I was massaging the other, and then I'd switch out. And I would take maybe 10 to 20 minutes to do that, put my shoes and socks back on, and keep hiking, and that helped a lot. What felt really good was when I would pull my toes back and then rub my foot from the heel up towards my toes on that plantar fascia. Stretching seemed to help my situation a lot, and not only did I stretch the plantar fascia, but also my Achilles tendon and my calf muscle, because all of that stuff is connected. When I was on trail, I would soak my feet in a cold spring, and when I was in town, if I could get my hands on a water bottle and a freezer, then I would freeze that water bottle and rub the frozen water bottle under my foot. So it was like a massage and an ice treatment all in one. They also make knot splints for people who suffer from plantar fasciitis. They help keep your foot at a 90-degree angle so it continues to stretch that plantar fascia while you're sleeping instead of it flopping down. I never used them on trail. I actually met a guy who did sleep with them because he had struggled with plantar fasciitis his whole life pretty much. But I've heard great things about them, and if mine hadn't healed up and I had known about these, then I definitely would have tried it. And above anything else is rest, giving your body a chance to heal up. Because you'll be walking a lot on a thru hike, then getting something like a sprained ankle is definitely not unheard of. Or if you fall, a sprained wrist. The best thing that you can do in this situation is stabilize it as much as possible, whether that's with bandanas and sticks or tent stakes, just whatever you've got. And then get to town as quickly and safely as possible and get it looked at by somebody. But I would assume that finding a cold spring to soak it in would be helpful to ease some pain and hopefully inflammation before you can get to town. Now let's talk about ticks and tick bites. Obviously, the risk of getting Lyme disease shouldn't be taken lightly, but I really expected to see more ticks on the AT than I did. I only saw 2 my entire thru hike, and neither of them were attached. I just found them crawling, one on my pack and one on me. But I know that can vary from year to year, and it seems like most years people are like, well, this is the worst year for ticks yet. But there are definitely some things that you can do to mitigate your risk. One, you can treat your gear and your clothing with permethrin. You can do this at home yourself. There are also some companies that will allow you to send them your stuff that you want treated, and they will do it for you. And then there are even some lines of outdoor clothing that are already treated with permethrin to help prevent ticks. You can also carry bug spray and spray on your ankles and shoes. Be careful with DEET because it will melt certain things like your gear, and also I've seen the ankles of socks lose their elasticity because DEET was sprayed on it, so be careful with that. But the best thing you can do for prevention against ticks is wear long pants and long socks, and probably I would assume that gaiters over the tops of your shoe would help too. I didn't want to subject myself to wearing poison every day, so I did not treat my stuff, and I also didn't use bug spray. I think I used bug spray one day on the entire AT. I also didn't want to be hot in the summer wearing long pants and long socks, so I just made it a point to check myself for ticks twice a day before I would go to bed at night when I was changing my clothes to put on my night clothes, and then again in the morning when I was changing into my hiking clothes. And you might think, well, if you were in your tent the whole night, why would you need to check again for ticks? But they can get on your gear or on your clothes and end up in your tent and find you at night while you're sleeping. So it's always good to check at least once a day, because if you can find a tick that's attached before it's been attached for 24 hours, that greatly reduces your risk of getting Lyme disease. If you do find a tick on your body, the best thing to do is clean the area with water and soap. If you don't have soap, then just clean the area as best you can. You could use baby wipes, hand sanitizer, etc. Then get a pair of tweezers. Get as close as you can to your skin, the base of where the tick has dug in, and pull the tick out, but make sure you get the head too. And then you clean the area again. Keep a look on the spot for any bullseye marks forming. I know that you don't have to have that to end up with Lyme disease, but even if you don't get the bullseye pattern and you feel fatigue, muscle aches, or fever, then as soon as you can get to town, I would stop by the doctor's office and let them take a look at you just in case. Now let's talk about Giardia, and this one is definitely not a fun one. Forest animals don't care if they poop in the water or near the water, and unfortunately sometimes humans don't either. Food, soil, and water that has been subjected to the fecal matter of an animal that was infected with Giardia can transmit that Giardia to you. Although it can be passed through all of those sources, I would say most of the hikers who end up with Giardia probably contract it from not treating their water. If you end up being a victim of Giardia, you might experience things like nausea and vomiting, gas, diarrhea, and dehydration. The best thing that you can do is get to town as quickly as possible and go see a doctor. But if you end up getting hit by this while you're on trail, you should definitely try to stay hydrated the best that you can with clean water. When I had food poisoning on trail, it wasn't the same as Giardia, but a lot of the symptoms were the same, and it seemed to help me to have some sort of bland foods to eat. So maybe you can trade another hiker if you've got a Mountain House lasagna meal and that's just not really sounding so good. If you can trade off for maybe plain dehydrated mashed potatoes, that might do a little bit better for you. Also, taking Pepto or Imodium could help temporarily with some of your symptoms like nausea and diarrhea. So with all of that in mind, I want to talk about a minimal first aid kit. Hopefully you'll never need it, but these are some items that I would have in handy just in case. First, a whistle. Now, if you check your sternum strap on your pack, you may notice that there's one built in there, but if not, I would get one to bring along. You can get a little plastic one that doesn't weigh hardly anything. But if you get an injury that's more serious than any of the ones I've mentioned, being able to blow that whistle and hopefully alert another hiker for some help would be a good thing. A needle, as I mentioned, these are great for dealing with blisters if you're gonna pop them. Also, you should already have it in your repair kit. Thread, if you think that you would want to try the blister wicking thing, you can bring a few feet of thread along for medical issues and also repairing clothing on trail. Tweezers will be helpful for ticks or splinters, and also if you get the stray eyebrow that's migrated down to your chin. I always like to have a small mirror, one for when I'm doing my hair and whatnot, but also to help check for ticks. Antibiotic ointment, as I mentioned before, can be useful with blisters and all sorts of other things on trail. An anti-diarrheal, whether that's Imodium, Pepto, Walmart brand, but just something to stop the waterworks. Moleskin / duct tape. I would definitely always have duct tape, but if you feel like you might be blister prone, or if you just want to carry some to start with just in case, it's not a bad idea. Benadryl is something I would have on hand that I didn't mention before, but you just never know when you might end up with an allergic reaction out in the middle of nowhere. So for the weight of some Benadryl tablets, it's worth it. And ibuprofen. I would watch your ibuprofen intake. Some hikers take it so much and daily that they start calling it vitamin I. Ibuprofen is one of those things that you don't want to be dependent on and taking frequently, but having some if you need it is good. Trekking poles were something that I had never used until starting my hike on the AT, but I followed some blogs and the people who seemed like they knew what they were doing used trekking poles, so I figured, well, I guess I ought to try them then. But I'm really glad that I did use trekking poles, and while not every thru hiker will have trekking poles, the majority of them will. And some of the benefits of trekking poles are, first, they save your knees, especially on downhills. Instead of just stomping down with the weight of your body and your pack, you can kind of brace yourself and have a less impact on your knees and your feet. Trekking poles can be particularly useful when fording creeks and rivers. There were some that I crossed on the AT that I'm really glad that I had trekking poles. They just helped stabilize me, but also made me feel better mentally about, if my foot plant isn't solid, then at least I've got my trekking poles that might help save me. I also appreciate trekking poles as a snake prodding stick. If I'm going to use the bathroom and I'm kind of bushwhacking off the side of the trail, then having the trekking pole to lead with at least helps me try to warn critters before I step on them and it's too late. Some trekking poles are also used in the setup of people's shelters. And finally, hopefully you won't ever have to use them for this purpose, but trekking poles can be a self-defense weapon if you need it. The first day on the AT, I had to ask somebody, hey, how do I use these? Like, how exactly are they supposed to work? And they said, okay, trekking poles when you first get started can be a little awkward, but maybe try using one out kind of as a walking stick or a cane. And when that starts to feel normal, then incorporate the other one. And sure enough, by the end of the day, I was using them and didn't look so awkward like a foal just learning to walk. Trekking poles will have a few different varieties. One example is you can get fixed trekking poles or collapsible trekking poles. I would definitely opt for the collapsible trekking poles. It just makes life easier. Being able to adjust the length of the pole to fit your body specifically is important. You want to have trekking poles to where when you're holding the grips, your elbow is at about a 90-degree angle. If you're going to fly to the trail with them or home with them, having something that you can break down and put in your checked bag would be nice. Trekking poles are usually made out of 3 different materials. You might see aluminum, which will be usually on the cheaper end of things and pretty durable. Titanium, which will be more lightweight, more durable, and more expensive than the aluminum. And then carbon fiber, which will probably be the most lightweight and expensive option. But unfortunately, they can be more prone to breaking if there's too much force put on them. For example, if you were to fall down and your trekking pole was wedged in a root or between a rock and a tree somehow, I don't know, weird things happen on trail, and you hold onto that trekking pole and it bends, you know, it could snap. Or I've seen in snow where somebody slipped and fell, and when they caught themselves with their trekking pole, it's snapped. But I would say most trekking pole companies would probably work with you in that situation. It's always good to check out customer service of the gear that you're purchasing. But since my thru hike of the AT, I've been using carbon fiber, and I really like it and have never had any issues. The grips of trekking poles can also be made out of different materials. You might see rubber, some sort of foam, and cork. Cork is probably the least cushiony option of the three, but I like it because it absorbs sweat, and so your hands aren't sticky and slimy. Rubber is probably more cushiony than cork. It's easier to clean, but don't count on it absorbing any kind of sweat. Foam will be your softest choice. It won't absorb as much moisture as the cork will, but it's not going to be quite as slippery as straight rubber. Typically, I prefer cork grips over all of the rest. I did end up with a pair of Lucky trekking poles that have rubber grips, but they have like a suede type finish on them, so my hands didn't feel so slimy. But in general, unless they're suede covered rubber grips, then I'm probably going to go with cork over anything else. You might see different locking mechanisms on trekking poles also. Some of them have lever locks and then some kind of twist to expand and then twist to lock. I prefer the lever locks. I've seen people have issues with the twisty lock trekking poles where they weren't functioning properly and then they had to find tools to do surgery. I've never had any real issues with my lever lock trekking poles. If the locks need to be tightened because your poles end up slipping for some reason, then it's usually pretty straightforward, and you can see a pin on the outside that you use like a flathead screwdriver to tighten it up, and you should be good to go. But the last thing that you want is to be on a steep downhill slope and putting a lot of weight on your trekking poles and they give. And finally, tips on trekking poles are replaceable. That might be very common knowledge, but to me, when I was starting the AT, it wasn't. So I started to get pretty stressed out towards the end of my hike when I saw I didn't have much left in the way of tips, and I was like, oh my gosh, so now do I have to replace my whole trekking pole? And I found out no, that the tips will generally just pull straight off and can be replaced. And so in Maine, I found an outfitter that had replacement tips, and he was even nice enough to replace them for me. As far as weight goes with trekking poles, I wouldn't be really stressed about making your trekking poles as lightweight as possible. It is nice to have less weight that you're picking up every time you move your arms, but I mean, let's be real, your arms aren't getting as much of a workout as your legs are while you're hiking. But if you're somebody who's going to use your trekking poles all the time, especially, then you don't really need to worry about the weight because it's not going to be added onto your pack. But if you're somebody who might use them occasionally and you're going to use them with your shelter, but a lot of times they'll be on your pack, then you might be concerned with the weight of the trekking poles a little bit more. And for particular brands, you can get anything from budget trekking poles on Amazon to $200 trekking poles. I don't think one or the other is going to make or break your hike, so just hone in on the features that you think you would prefer, check the reviews, and worst case scenario, if your trekking poles fail on you, then you can always pick up a walking stick in the woods. Now I want to talk about safety on the Appalachian Trail. How safe is it actually to go out there, spend 5 to 6.5, 7, however long it takes you months to hike the AT? Well, most of the risks associated with being out on trail are your typical risks that you would take doing any sort of outdoor activity where you can injure yourself or have an encounter with wildlife. And yes, you will also have encounters with other humans, so there is the risk of crime. Luckily, the Appalachian Trail in terms of crime is a pretty safe place because you've got millions of people who go out to the AT every year, whether that's to day hike, section hike, thru hike, etc. One of the crime rates that I wanted to look at personally before I thru hiked the AT was how many murders have happened on the AT. And since the trail's completion in 1937, there have been less than 15 murders. Now, I'm not saying that those murders were not important, that those lives lost were not very unfortunate, but name one area in the U.S. where approximately 3 million people visit each year that in the last 80 years has had less than 15 murders. You probably can't name one, or at least without giving it a lot of thought, because when you have that many people going to a specific area, typically the crime rate is going to be higher. So while I don't expect that telling your family only X amount of murders have happened in the last 80 years, they should find some sort of comfort in knowing that most of the time the AT is not a high crime area. But let's talk about some of the things that can be risky out on the trail and ways to help mitigate that risk. I want to start with hitchhiking, because this was something that I was really concerned about, and I actually didn't tell my mom I was gonna have to hitchhike until after I was already out on trail. But hitchhiking, I guess unfortunately, is necessary when you're through hiking on the AT. And while in some areas you can call for a shuttle, that's not going to always be possible, and even if it is, it's a really big expense, which it may be worth it to you to shuttle every time you can. It's definitely important to recognize hitchhiking as a potential danger, because it is. But I have to say, on the AT, I met incredible people while I was hitchhiking. I loved having conversations with them, but I never felt in danger or threatened while I was hitchhiking. And most of the people along the AT corridor and the towns where the AT goes near, those people are very supportive of hikers. They bring revenue into their towns. And not just that, but in general, they're happy to see people doing this amazing thing. So a lot of the folks around the AT are going to be very willing to go out of their way to help you out. For me, that was a little bit weird at first. I was like, why are these people being so nice? So definitely be cautious, but don't stress yourself out too much about hitchhiking. But some of the things that you can do to make hitchhiking less risky is, first, try the buddy system. Even if you're a solo hiker, oftentimes you're going to get to the trailhead within an hour of other hikers to try to go to town. So even if you have to sit around and wait for a little while until somebody else comes along to hitchhike with you, then that is an option. When I hitchhike, I'm always mindful to take my wallet, my cell phone, my pepper spray if I've got some, and a pocket knife, or nowadays I carry a neck knife, and have those things easily accessible to me. I've never actually heard of this happening to somebody, but it certainly could. If you have somebody pull up that's willing to give you a ride and they open up their trunk so you can put your stuff in, well, now you close your trunk. So any form of self-protection is in there, your wallet, your gear. So if I shut that trunk and they drive off with all of my gear, then I at least have my phone and my wallet and I can figure things out from there. But if I have my self-protection in my pack and I shut the trunk and then something bad happens inside the vehicle, well, then it doesn't really do me any good to have any form of self-protection. If you're going to carry something like pepper spray or a knife, then I would definitely make sure that you're proficient at using that item. Even if you've got to go out and test out your pepper spray, make sure you know how to draw your knife safely or open it quickly as possible, because in self-defense instances, time is definitely of the essence. And actually, when I'm riding in a vehicle, I normally have my pepper spray safety off and my finger on it, waiting just in case I need to use it. I hope that I never have to, but it's just something that I try to prepare for just in case. Another suggestion is, when you approach the vehicle to hitchhike, you can snap a quick picture of the tag and text it to somebody. A lot of times you will have service at the trailhead, or at least get it somewhere on the way into town, so you can have a point of contact back home that knows, okay, this is the vehicle that I'm in and this is the tag number. Always listen to your gut. If you put your thumb out and somebody pulls over and for some reason you get a weird vibe, or the heebie-jeebies, don't question that. Tell them that you left a gear item back on trail and gosh, you're stupid and now you have to go get it. Or that you've got a friend back there on trail and you're gonna go back and wait on them, but whatever excuse you're gonna come up with, try to brainstorm some of that before you're in that situation. I would try to stick to daylight hours when hitchhiking. I did hitchhike a couple of times at night because I got to the road crossing and town was there and I wanted it so badly that I was willing to put my thumb out. But anytime I hitchhiked at night, I did have a partner with me. But yeah, sticking to the daylight hours just seems like it's a little bit safer of an idea. Also, pay attention to the law for the state that you're in. And sometimes I guess there could be more restrictive rules for hitchhiking in counties, etc. If you're near a prison for some reason, there is no hitchhiking allowed. I don't recall experiencing that on the AT, but I do remember on my thru hike, New York and New Jersey, you weren't supposed to hitchhike. But if you're using a guidebook or the Far Out app, that up-to-date information should be listed there. When hitchhiking, there are definitely some ways to improve your chances of getting a ride. First of all, try to look as friendly and as approachable as possible. So you want to remove your sunglasses, take off your hat so they can see the expression of your face, that you look happy, smile at them. Also sit in a good location. Maybe somebody wants to give you a ride, but where you're set up, putting your thumb out, there's really no good spot for them to pull off. So even if you have to walk down the road a ways so that they're not trying to pull over in a curve or where there's no shoulder, you know, do what you have to do to make it safe for somebody to pull over and pick you up, because then the likelihood of them doing so is going to increase. Make sure that your pack and your trekking poles are visible. That way they can differentiate you as a thru hiker or backpacker versus a random drifter, because a lot of times people are very supportive of the trail community, but if they don't identify like, okay, this is a hiker, they might be a little bit more hesitant to pick you up. If you're traveling in a large group like your tramily or trail family, maybe split off. You know, the other folks hang back and only 2 people go up and try to hitch at one time, because having a very large group can be overwhelming, and also it will limit you to only people who have like vans or RVs to fit your whole group in there. You know, they might look and go, well, I can't pick up all those people, or I don't feel comfortable doing so. But just having a couple of people, that's more feasible. You can also try the old method of making sure you have a girl in your group. I know for myself, I appreciated having a guy to hitchhike with, or even another girl. And I know that they appreciated having a girl to hitchhike with, because the likelihood of people wanting to help out a female versus a male is just the way that it is. I had a lot of people pick me up, or me and a guy up, that would say, you know, if there hadn't been a female, I wouldn't have pulled over. But, you know, she was with the guy, so it made me feel like, okay, he can't be the worst person in the world. And also, I felt inclined to help out this damsel in distress. And finally, if you've got a piece of cardboard, or maybe you can get a bandana made that says like hiker to town, but if you can let people know your intentions, like I'm an AT thru hiker and I would really like to go to town. They can see that and identify, oh yeah, this is where the Appalachian Trail is, and this person just wants to go to town to get some food and a shower. So those are some tips and tricks that I've found along the way that help increase my likelihood of getting a ride. One of the questions I've been asked the most about my thru hike of the AT was, did you carry a gun? Most hikers do not carry a gun with them on trail, and the small percentage that do oftentimes send it home not long after they start the trail, because they no longer feel threatened enough to carry one, and also the weight and some other reasons that I'll go into in a minute. Now, I'm not saying that nobody has ever taken a pistol with them throughout their entire thru hike, but before you decide what works best for you, I want to cover some of the reasons that I personally did not carry one with me, although I am somebody who normally carries one in my purse daily. The first reason I didn't carry a gun is guns and ammo are heavy, and I've already got all of this gear in my pack that I am going to be using on a daily basis, so it just wasn't worth it to me to carry the extra weight of a gun and bullets. But for you, it may be, and that is a personal preference. Then the legality of carrying a pistol from Georgia to Maine, or Maine to Georgia, or flip-floppy. Having a concealed carry license in your own home state and then having that be reciprocated by every state that the AT goes through is pretty much impossible. Some states you can get an out-of-state license for, but many of them you cannot. Some states you can open carry, others you cannot. And there are significant portions of the trails that go through national parks, and it's illegal to discharge a firearm in a national park. And while I know if you were in a horrible situation where you needed to do that, it might be worth it to you to break the law. But with all of those things considered, I just decided that it was too much trouble to try to work it all out. And yes, I understand that even though it's illegal, that doesn't mean you're going to get in trouble unless you're caught breaking the law. But personally, I didn't want to take that risk. Also, comfort and accessibility of carrying a firearm. In the summertime, I was hiking in a tank top and shorts. I've got my hip belt buckling around my waist, my sternum strap around my chest, and just imagining trying to also carry a pistol where I could easily access it, but yet it was concealed seemed not a very feasible thing for me. And if it's not easily accessible, then why are you carrying it? Because if said threat is in front of you and you have to go, hold on a second, I gotta take my pack off and grab out my pistol so that I can protect myself against you, well, it doesn't really work well like that. Now, you could argue that even during the day, if you don't have it on you, you know, okay, you're taking that risk, but at least at night in your tent, you could have it with you to protect yourself while you're sleeping. And by all means, if it's worth it to you to carry a firearm just for the night, then that's your decision. Again, I would say 99.8% of thru hikers never carry a firearm, and most of them feel like they never needed it. But you have to run through all of those points for yourself and decide what makes you most comfortable. If you are going to carry a firearm with you out on trail, then definitely make sure that you are skilled with that firearm and you know how to properly handle it safely. Next up, fording rivers. For 13 of the 14 states on the AT, you get spoiled with footbridges and you don't even have to really think about going through the rivers until you get to Maine. And in Maine, there are several crossings that made me a little nervous, but I had never really forded rivers before. So there are some things that you can do to make sure that you're making the best decisions possible to be safe while fording a river. First, temperature. If it's really cold outside when you get to Maine, then waiting until midday, if possible, to ford a river is going to be a more comfortable experience for you, because if it's really cold outside and you hit that water crossing late in the evening and then you're really not going to hike a lot more after that, and say, you know, you even slip and fall and don't get washed away, but now you're soaked from head to toe and you're setting up camp pretty quick, you won't really have time to warm up well. So if you can time the crossings for the highest temperature of the day or midday, then that would be your safest bet. Weather, that's something else to think about when fording a river, because if you know, for example, a lot of rain is coming the next day, then it might make sense to try to push more miles and get across that river crossing the night before. Also, if it's been raining a lot already and the rivers or crossings seem a little bit swollen, then you can always camp right before the crossing and hopefully the levels will drop by the morning. Don't be ashamed to walk up and down the river some looking for the best and safest place to cross. It's better to aim for wider areas than more narrow areas, because those narrow sections are typically deeper and faster. So while it might look like, oh, this is a shorter distance, those wider, flatter areas are typically a better option. And now for the unbuckle versus don't unbuckle yourself argument. A lot of people say that it's best to unbuckle yourself from your pack before you cross a river. That way, if you were to end up getting knocked down or slip on a rock, then the pack will easily come off of you and you can swim much more easily without a 30-pound pack on your back. But there is also something to be said for getting used to the way that that weight rides on your back, and as soon as you unclip your sternum strap and your hip belt strap, then that weight just kind of pushes down on your shoulders, and I feel like I am more unbalanced when I unclip myself from my pack. So I think this is also one of those things that's a personal preference and really depends on the individual. But if you do slip and fall and you haven't unclipped your pack, if you're conscious, then the best thing you can do is unclip from your pack. And I understand that losing your gear might be problematic, but as long as you're alive and you don't drown, then you can worry about that situation after you get out of the river. Make sure when you're crossing a river that you feel secure in your footing before you make the next step. You don't want to be like, oh, I don't know about where I'm standing here, and then lift all of this weight up on that unsecure foot. Having trekking poles helps with this. You know, you've got basically 2 more legs that you're planting down and helping to stabilize yourself. Your best footing is probably going to come from wearing your trail runners or boots to ford the river. Some people prefer to take theirs off and do it barefoot. I've done this before just because I didn't want wet feet on the other side, but if it looks like actually a sketchy crossing, then I'm going to keep my trail runners on. I don't mind having wet feet later. Also, if it's really rocky and the rocks seem jagged, then you're going to protect your feet better having trail runners or boots. Some people will even carry water shoes as their camp shoes so that they can use them for water crossings, but to me, that just seems like overkill and it's a little heavy. Some people like to take their clothes off before fording a river, especially if it's cold out and the water's any kind of deep. I guess they don't want their breeches to be wet, or if they were to slip and fall, their whole outfit to be wet. Some people do it in their birthday suit, some people in their undergarments. This is definitely not something that you have to do, but that you might prefer. If you get to some really swift moving water, the best form for crossing is to face upstream and kind of cross at an angle to where you're stepping sideways, but you'll kind of be moving downstream as you go, and also kind of lean into that rush of water coming your direction. And the reason that you face upstream is if you are facing downstream or even to the side, then you've got the force of that water pushing either to the backs or on the sides of your knees, and that can cause your legs to buckle and you to fall into the water. Of course, if you can use the buddy system and cross with somebody else, 2 heads are better than 1, and y'all might see a rock hop that would work for you, or you can both scout up and down the river. Worst case scenario, if you happen to fall into the water and now you're being washed away, like I mentioned before, if you have not unbuckled your pack, then do that as quickly as possible. Push your pack off, flip over onto your back, and put your knees up in the air. So hopefully you don't get snagged on any rocks or logs, anything under the water that can snatch you under, potentially causing you to drown. Also, having your feet out up in front of you, you can kind of use them to push off obstacles in the river. And then once you reach calm enough waters, you can swim to the shore and climb out. My favorite river to cross on the AT was the Kennebec in Maine, because you get to cross it on a canoe. There's actually a ferry system set up. They do have a specific time they operate in the season and actual times of the day that you can get there and get a ride across. But I'm going to include the website in the video description of what those current seasonal offerings are as far as the ferry system goes. There are certain hours and days throughout the season that the ferry operates, but you can find those hours online, and I'll actually put a link to it in the video description. But just know that the ferry system is set up for a reason, and fording the Kennebec River is highly advised against, and I feel like once you get there, you'll probably understand why. While through hiking the AT, you could be subjected to poisonous plants like ivy, oak, sumac, etc. That's something you might want to keep in mind before you hit the trail, especially if you know you are highly allergic to those things. The best thing that you can do to prevent a reaction is obviously keep your legs covered, whether that's wearing high socks or pants when you hike. It also helps if you can identify these plants before you head out on the trail. That way, when you're at a water source and you're leaning in to collect some water and you see a plant that you recognize as poisonous, you won't brush your legs all up against it. If you get a rash, make sure not to scratch it. And obviously, by the time you get to town, if you are still having issues with the rash, then you can get further treatment there. Hypothermia is a concern anytime you're in the outdoors. A lot of people think that in 3-season weather, spring, summer, and fall, you really don't have to worry about it, that it's more of a winter backpacking thing, but that's just not true. You can actually experience hypothermia in the middle of the summertime. And for those of y'all who are not familiar with hypothermia, it's when your body cannot maintain a normal temperature and it drops too low. Some of the symptoms of somebody who's just becoming hypothermic might be shivering, pale or gray-looking skin, some unsteadiness or stumbling, the ability to not perform functions that are normal. One example of this that I have felt in myself is I was setting my tent up one time on another trail when it was really, really cold, and putting the stakes in the ground and just the process of setting up the tent was way more cumbersome than it had ever felt before. My hands weren't functioning properly. So if you see or experience any of that, then you definitely need to take action as quickly as possible. You or the person who is experiencing the symptoms of hypothermia should be warmed up as quickly as possible in whatever means possible. If you've got an emergency blanket or a quilt, sleeping bag, if you've got to gather several from different people, or even skin-to-skin contact from another human to warm up the individual that is hypothermic. If at all possible, you want to get some warm liquids into this person, even if it's just warm water and some calories, because your body needs the calories to process and warm itself up. Some of the later stages of hypothermia might be stiff muscles, a light pulse, the trunk of the person's body might feel cold to the touch, and then of course loss of consciousness. But hopefully before any of that happens, you've been able to warm the person up and get them evacuated to safety. On the flip side of hypothermia, you have hyperthermia, where your body is too hot. On the AT, there won't be many situations where it's really warm outside and you're in a long exposed area with the sun beating down on you. You do have the green tunnel most of the time, but it's not all about the temperature and whether you're being baked by the sun, but also the humidity. So a high humidity can interfere with your body's ability to sweat and then to have that sweat evaporate, which cools you down. So if you're feeling a little bit too warm in the heat of the day, don't push that. If you have to stop and take an hour or two or however long of a break you need to cool off and allow your body to rest, then do that. Because while you have miles to go, you can't do it if you get overheated and die. Putting your feet in a cool creek or taking a swim if you've got a body of water big enough to do that, or maybe a bandana with some of your drinking water on it, put on your neck, can help cool you down. Whatever it takes to make sure that you're not overheating. If you think you or somebody else is suffering from hyperthermia, some of the things that you might notice are rapid breath, rapid pulse, signs of exhaustion, obviously loss of consciousness, also headache, nausea, and dizziness. So if it's already gotten this far, then doing whatever you can to cool the person down, as I mentioned before, would be useful, but also fanning them and helping that sweat evaporate from their body. And of course, as soon as you can, seek medical attention or help from emergency services. The next safety issue I want to cover is wildlife. And having an actual issue that causes injury to you with wildlife is very rare. So if you're like, oh my gosh, the lions and tigers and bears are going to get me, probably not. Let's start off with snakes. You will see potentially 3 venomous snakes along the AT. The rattlesnake, and yes, I understand there may be different types of rattlesnakes, but a snake with some rattles, that's one of the kinds. A water moccasin, or also referred to as a cottonmouth. and a copperhead. I actually only saw one venomous snake the entire time I was on the AT, and that was in Pennsylvania, and it was a big old well-fed rattlesnake who was just minding his own business, moseying across the trail, and we gave him a wide berth and moved on around, and we both went our merry little ways. Maybe you'll find comfort like I did before I started my hike, and knowing that 7,000 to 8,000 people in the U.S. every year are bitten by venomous snakes. Now, that's not the comforting part, but the comforting thing is that usually only somewhere around 5 people die. And my guess is a lot of those probably don't seek medical attention, or they were already not doing well health-wise. So as long as you, as soon as you can, seek medical help or EMS services, then you should be fine. Obviously, the best thing that you can do to prevent being bitten by a venomous snake is to be aware of your surroundings. And especially when you go to take a break, you might just mindlessly throw off your pack and flop down next to a rock or a tree to lean against. But I've seen little baby rattlesnakes curled up in like the V of a tree, right where somebody might lean up against while taking a break. Snakes can certainly be curled up near rocks, in grass and leaves where you can't see them. So if I'm gonna take a break somewhere that I feel like a snake could be pretty camouflaged, like near some brush or in the leaves, then I'll take my trekking pole and just tap around, poke around, move the leaves around just to stir things up. So if something's there, I'm giving it a warning with my trekking pole instead of with my booty. Also, when you go off to use the bathroom, it's nice to have a trekking pole for the same purpose, just to kind of tap around before you pull your britches down and get a surprise. And finally, if I'm crossing over a blowdown and I can't see on the other side of the log, oftentimes I'll tap that area with my trekking pole too, just so I don't end up stepping on one as I'm climbing over the log. If you weren't very observative and now, for whatever reason, you have been bitten by a venomous snake, the best thing that you can do is to stay calm. That sounds like an impossible thing to do, but the more you freak out, the more your heart rate's gonna go up and the venom will spread more quickly throughout your body. If you're gonna clean the area that has been bitten, then you wanna wait 15 to 30 seconds of allowing it to freely bleed before you do that. You don't wanna apply a tourniquet or even a cold pack if you're at a campsite and somebody has some ice or something like that, because although you think, okay, that's gonna stop it from flowing to other areas by the tourniquet cutting off the circulation and the cold pack by slowing down the flow of blood, this is actually counterproductive for saving that limb, because then you are concentrating the venom in that one particular area. And certainly you don't wanna cut it or suck the venom, leave that stuff for the movies. But if you don't have something like a personal locator beacon or satellite device where you can call for professional help immediately, you can check cell phone reception and see if you can get a call out to 911. But if you can't, for whatever reason, contact emergency services right away, then you should drop as much weight as possible. Obviously, you want to keep essentials like water, but try to make it a priority to calmly but quickly get to a trailhead where you can be evacuated to get some help. Bears. The good thing is you won't have to stress out about grizzly bears on the AT, but you will see black bears. If somebody makes it through a whole hike of the AT and doesn't see a single bear, to me that's impressive. Like, you should go buy a lottery ticket. Where people tend to see bears the most, or at least the year that I thru-hiked, was in parts of Virginia, New Jersey, and New York. So you should use the same precautions regardless of where you are on the AT and expect that you can see them anywhere. Most bears that you cross paths with are going to flee as soon as they see you or hear you. They don't want any part of you, and they're scared of humans. Now, if you notice a bear that doesn't seem to be afraid of humans, that's a concern for sure. And in that situation, you should try to leave the area as quickly as possible by backing away slowly, not making eye contact, and certainly don't run, because that can trigger the chase instinct in bears, kind of like dragging a piece of yarn next to a cat. If you see a bear that you've noticed but you're not sure that it's seen or noticed you, you can speak loudly and firmly to it. Again, don't make eye contact, and if they're not fleeing, then you should try to get out of the situation as quickly as possible. If a bear advances you, you should try to appear as big as possible. Hold up your trekking poles and make sure to stand your ground. Because again, if you turn around and run, then it might be game on for the bear. So standing your ground, yelling, looking big, throwing rocks, whatever you have to do to try to intimidate that bear and make it leave is your best bet. Worst case scenario, if you are attacked by a black bear, you should fight with everything that you have to try to get that bear off of you. Because when black bears attack, they're generally not doing it like a grizzly bear would, where they're just kind of playing with you and roughing you up. They're doing it because they're hungry and they're in a bad enough spot that they've identified you as worth eating. So it is not advised to play dead with a black bear. Again, fight with all you have and for your life. As far as bear deterrents go, some people like to carry bells with them because if a bear can hear the bells coming, then the idea is they'll flee from the trail before you ever get there. But there have actually been several studies done, and one of the studies says that the bells helped. Another study says that it made no difference and the bears kind of tuned the bells out like background noise, like birds chirping or any other noise. And finally, there's a study that says that the bells actually make it worse because either bears learn to identify that noise with hikers, and if they've started identifying food with hikers, then it can be like dinner bells. Or maybe even a bear could have some curiosity and want to go check out what that noise is. So if you want to, you can read those studies in depth and see where you land on that. But personally, to me, bear bells are extremely annoying, and I think that I couldn't deal with it for 2,000 miles. Bear spray is an option, and if you feel more comfortable hiking in bear country having some bear spray, then by all means go for it. The cans of bear spray are a little on the heavier side, and that may be worth it to you. For me personally, it was not, and for I would say about 98% of the thru hikers on the AT, it was also not worth the wait, and they did not carry bear spray. If you are going to carry bear spray, make sure that you have it somewhere where it's very easily accessible, because you can go from just walking down the trail and boom, next thing you know, there's a mama bear with cubs who's mad at you and advancing you. So you want to have it somewhere where you can quick draw, like attached to your hip belt or your chest strap, something like that. I think the best thing for deterring bears as you're walking down trail is to be loud. You can sing, or if there are other hikers around, you can talk to them. Now, I understand that might scare off other wildlife that you'd be interested in seeing, but I'm just saying if you're afraid of bears, then making noise will certainly help deter them from being on the path when you come through. Bears are most active during the early morning hours and also in the evening just before dark, so dawn and dusk. But you can have issues with bears in camp, especially bears that have grown accustomed to liking hiker scraps, things that hikers leave behind. And as the old saying goes, a fed bear is a dead bear, because they can start getting aggressive once they've realized, hey, it's a lot easier to just find a hiker and steal their food than it is to go do what bears normally do. So to avoid issues with bears at camp and to help prevent further issues for people in the future, it is recommended that you observe the BEARmuda triangle. And basically the BEARmuda triangle is just separating the areas where you're sleeping, where you're cooking, and where you store your food throughout the night. I've seen several different illustrations. Some will say you have to have all of these areas 200 feet apart, or 300 feet apart, or 70 steps apart. And then also your shelter should be upwind from the food areas. Now, making sure that these areas are a significant distance apart, sure, that makes sense. But the direction of the wind, I wouldn't stress that too much, because you'll learn quickly enough, if you're not already familiar with outdoors, that the wind direction can change pretty quickly and several times throughout the night. The reality is you do the best that you can, and there are even quite a few shelters in Georgia, and possibly even more going north now, that have bear cables set up near the shelters. So it's really easy for you to just walk over, clip your food bag on a bear cable, and then hoist it up. And then the next morning you go and you get your bear bag, and you don't have to worry about a bear stealing your food in the middle of the night. Not only do you want to get the sense of food, your cook pot, any trash and wrappers out of your tent while you're sleeping at night, or your hammock, your shelter, but you also want to get any scented items like lotion, baby wipes, any other cosmetics or powders, anything that might make a bear curious enough to try to come in and try it out. Obviously, if you're at a campsite that doesn't have a bear cable system, then you'll have to hang your own bear bag. I was really nervous about this, and I had never done it before. I needed to one night on the AT, but thankfully there were a lot of other hikers around who had either done it a few times or not at all, but we all figured it out together, and it was a lot of fun. Basically, you want to find a branch that is at least 18 or so feet off of the ground, and also that sticks out pretty far past the trunk, because the idea is when you hang your bag, you want it to be in a spot where if the bear shimmies up the trunk, he can't reach out and grab your bag. If he shimmies out on the branch that your bag is hanging from, he can't reach down and grab it, and certainly you don't want one being able to just walk under your bear bag and reach up and get it. So the recommended dimensions are at least 12 feet off the ground, 6 feet below the branch, and I suppose maybe 6 feet or so out from the trunk of the tree. To get your bag up there, you will take your cord and tie a rock to the end of it, or if you have something like a sock, you could throw a rock inside the sock and tie that to the cord. I just have found that sometimes trying to tie the cord around the rock doesn't work super well. And the Z-Packs bear bagging kit comes with a little rock sack. But anyway, you tie the rock, however, to one end of the cord, and on the other end of the cord is your food bag. You take the rock and you throw it up and over the branch. This may take several times before you're successful, but I promise eventually you'll get there. But when you ring the branch, make sure to watch, because that rock is gonna come flying right back at you. And I was so excited when I rang my first branch that I was like jumping up and down and about busted my teeth out, but thankfully I ducked before the rock hit me. And then you will take the rock end of the cord and pull down, which will raise your bag up in the air. Then you'll take the cord and tie it off to the trunk of the tree. There is another common method to hang a bear bag, which is called the PCT method. It's said to be a little bit more bear proof. If you want to learn more about that method, then you can check out in the video description. And I'll put a link to a video where I show different hanging methods for bear bags. And I can't stress enough that when you leave camp and go to the next place, try to clean up all of the remnants of food possible. That way we don't end up with bears who are aggressive, potentially harming humans, and then unfortunately having to be put down. If you don't want to fool with bear bagging, there are some other options. One, you can look into an Ursack. They've got Ursacks for different animal ratings, if you will. So you want to find one that is rodent proof and also bear proof. But an Ursack, you can put a rock on top of it or tie it to a tree, and the idea is the bag itself is not able to be torn into by a bear. Another option is a bear canister, and you put all your food inside the canister, it locks down, and bears can knock it around, but they can't actually get into it. Both of these options are significantly heavier, especially the bear can, than having a bear bag, and most people don't fool with these options, but they are options that exist, and I felt like you should at least know about them. Now, there is a section of trail between Giardia Gap and Neal Gap from March 1st to June 1st that requires, if you camp there, that you have a bear canister, and I didn't want to fool with getting a bear canister just for that section and then having to get rid of it after that. So I opted to camp before Giardia Gap, and I knew that I was going to Neal Gap that day, so I just hiked through. And Neal Gap will be your first resupply point, so it's just 5 miles right before you're going to be going in to resupply. So if you're adamant that you want to camp on Blood Mountain or some particular spot in that area, then just know that it is a requirement you have a bear canister and you should follow those rules. Now keep in mind that bears are not the only critters that are going to be after your food. Mice will go crazy to get after some hiker food. So if you're not that concerned about the possibility of a bear coming in to get your food at night, I have seen tents that have holes chewed through them because mice will come in to try to find your food while you're asleep. And because mice know that hikers are messy and they want to take advantage of all the crumbs they can, there's usually like a resident family of mice in each hiker shelter along the AT. So if you're deathly afraid of mice, then you probably want to avoid the shelters at night. But if you are going to sleep in the shelters, it's not common that mice try to get in your sleeping bag with you or anything like that. I mean, I guess unless you've got some food in your pocket. But when you hang your pack up in the shelter, or if you have it propped up in the corner, I would definitely make sure that you have all snacks and wrappers out of the pack. I mean, you should have it in your bear bag anyway, all of those scented things. But when I slept in shelters, I would even take the extra precaution of making sure that my hip belt pockets were unzipped and that the pack was open, because if a mouse has an easy way into these places to scope things out, then they won't chew through there. But if you've got some crumbs in your hip belt pocket, then a mouse might chew through your pocket to go get those crumbs. I saw somebody too that forgot they had something like a pack of crackers in their shirt pocket, and they had their shirt hanging up in the shelter, and when they woke up in the morning, there was a hole in the shirt and about half the crackers. Mice can also gnaw on things like trekking pole grips if they've got a lot of salt on them, so just do what you can to protect your gear if you're sleeping in a shelter, and even if you're at a well-trodden campsite. Now I want to talk about something that I feel like can help in instances where you've done all you can to be safe, but something still goes wrong, and that's either a personal locator beacon or a satellite messaging device. When I was getting ready to hike the AT, I really couldn't afford a personal locator beacon or a satellite messaging device, but I also thought that the main reason you would use something like that is if you were to get lost on trail. The AT is very well marked, and usually getting lost isn't a common issue. You might end up on another trail or something like that, but as far as actually being lost, it's just not as concerning as some other things. But in a scenario where you've been bitten by a snake, or you've broken a bone, or some other horrible thing has happened, being able to call for help can literally be life-saving. Personal locator beacons are not devices that you can communicate with people through, except for that one time you're hitting SOS and calling for help. But personal locator beacons supposedly do have a stronger signal, so that is a pro for them. And also for personal locator beacons, you don't have to purchase a subscription for messaging, so all in all, they are the cheaper option. As far as satellite messaging devices go, there are a lot of different options. There are things like the Spot device, where you can't actually text to people, but you can upload pre-programmed messages like good morning, leaving camp, at lunch, taking a break, made it safe to camp, you know, whatever messages you want, and send those out to the designated people you want to receive them. But of course, it does also have the SOS button that you can hit if you're in trouble. And then there are devices like the inReach, where you can actually message back and forth with your loved ones or friends, and you can choose which messaging subscription you prefer. You might not want to message a lot, or you might want to text as if it's your phone, and these devices will also Bluetooth through your phone, and so you can use an app to type and text instead of the device itself. All of the satellite messaging devices that I'm aware of anyway allow people to track you if you choose to turn that option on, so you can see why they might be more desirable for people at home, but still knowing that you've got some way to push a button, whether you go with a personal locator beacon or a messaging device, then I feel like that can give you and your family a lot of peace of mind. I didn't go with either option on the AT. I think I was just kind of playing tough, but after getting more and more experience under my belt, I realized how quickly things can go wrong, and I don't hit a trail anymore without having one of these options. And devices like the inReach Explorer Plus actually double as a second navigational tool. Now let's talk about navigation, specifically guidebooks and a particular app. The only two guidebooks I saw used on the AT were AWOL's AT Guide and the guidebook put out by the ATC. Both guides offer very useful information, including elevation profiles, town maps, post office business hours, hostel lodging information, shelter locations, detailed mileage breakdown, and a whole lot more. But in 2015, I had originally ordered the ATC thru-hiker's companion, and I just wasn't impressed. I didn't think that it was very user-friendly. So I'd heard a lot of good things about AWOL's guidebook. I checked it out, and that's the one that I ended up taking with me. When I thru-hiked, most everybody I knew had AWOL's AT Guide. It's available in different formats, PDF, book form, or loose leaf, and what I did was I ordered it as a book and PDF, and then I gave my mom the book so she could read along, and I had her print out pages of the PDF that she would send me at different points along the trail. That way I didn't have to carry the entire book. But I think that's kind of why the loose leaf service is offered. That way you just take what you want with you and have more sent to you, and you can toss the pages as you use them. In addition to the guidebook, for navigation, there is an app called Far Out, formerly known as Guthook, and it has the AT track in the app along with a lot of different waypoints of businesses and water sources, shelters, campsites, etc. It will also have elevation profile. But what I like about having the app on my phone is if I have no service and my phone's in airplane mode, then I can still open the app. If I feel like I'm off trail, I can see exactly where the trail is, where I'm located, and I can head back to the trail. Also, you can click waypoints and see the distance that you are from those points, and you don't have to do math. But one of my favorite things about the app is that hikers can leave comments on different waypoints, like the water sources, to tell you, hey, it's still flowing, or on those fording situations that I was talking about. Hey, if you walk upstream 1/10 of a mile, there's a really big tree down that you can easily walk across instead of fording this river. And obviously, some of those finer details won't be printed in AWOL's guidebook. So I guess you just get more real-time information with the app. But if I was to do it all again, I would probably have both. I would have the app to where I could see my location at any given time, and also the PDF version of the guidebook on my phone, just in case there was any other information that was in the guidebook not in the app. The trail is marked with 2-inch by 6-inch white rectangles known as blazes, and these can be on trees, rocks, wooden posts, etc., but they help mark the way. You might also sometimes see blue blazes, blue rectangles, that denote either the way to a water source, a side trail to a lookout point, or an alternate route. But the trail is very well maintained, it's obvious, it's a clear path, and these blazes help point the way. Now let's talk about some electronics. First thing, a headlamp. This is something you're going to want to have on trail so that you can actually see in your tent at night, and also if you want to get up and use the bathroom, or if you might be interested in doing some night hiking. Some of the main features I look for in a headlamp are an adjustable beam. I really like having a low, a medium, and a high beam just for different scenarios. Also an adjustable tilt on the light itself. So if I'm not hiking, I'm not having to stare down right in front of me, I can actually tilt the beam down so I can see in front of me without having to strain my neck. Also, a red beam is essential, especially on the Appalachian Trail, because you will be camped around other people, and if you're gonna sleep in a shelter and you're gonna either arrive after it's gotten dark or possibly leave before the sun comes up, not blinding everybody who's trying to sleep is a very considerate thing to do. The red beam is just less intense and more friendly to the eyes. Also, it seems to help with bugs. So if you get out of your tent, speaking of. So if you get out of your tent at night and bugs are attracted to your white light, or when you're not hiking, if you flip on that red beam, it seems to be less exciting to them. I also prefer having a headlamp that's rechargeable. When I was through hiking the AT, I had a headlamp that I had to put batteries into. So I had to worry about finding extra batteries in town, making sure that I didn't forget to do that, and then dealing with the weight of the extra batteries. So I prefer to have a rechargeable headlamp that I can recharge on trail with my battery pack, which I'll get into in a minute. Or if I don't need to recharge it on trail, then when I get to town, I can recharge it. The only time a rechargeable headlamp can be a pain is if you've forgotten to charge it and you want to night hike, because a lot of them don't work while they're plugged in. So I guess that is one downside. And then of course I look for something that is lightweight. There is no need to have these really heavy, bulky headlamps. One thing that you will see when selecting a headlamp is they have different amounts of light output or lumens. On the AT, my headlamp was a Coast brand headlamp and it had an output of 210 lumens. It definitely did the trick as far as using it around camp and in my tent, but for night hiking, I knew that I wanted to have something brighter going forward. So now I use the Nightcore NU25 headlamp, and it has a brightness of 360 lumens. But if you're not gonna night hike and you're only getting a headlamp for in the tent, around camp, then pretty much any decent headlamp you find will work just fine for you. So let's talk about those battery banks. How much power you're gonna need is dependent upon your electronic usage. For me on the AT, I only had my cell phone, and it was, I think, an iPhone 4S. And I had a 5200 milliamp hour charger that charged my phone probably around 2 times. Nowadays, it wouldn't go as far with a newer cell phone, but that's all I needed to charge. But the average person with average electronics use will probably get by just fine with a 10,000 milliamp hour charger, and I at least think that would be a good starting off point. The most popular brand of backup battery bank I've seen on trail is the Anchor charger. That's my go-to brand of backup battery bank because I've never had any problems out of them before, and I've even dropped them a few times, used them for several hikes, and they're still trucking on. Backup battery chargers do take a while to charge, as in not charge your other devices, but the batteries themselves take a while. So if you're going to be a person who pops into a town and resupplies and gets back out and doesn't stay the night, you want to prioritize charging your battery bank as soon as you get to town. And you might, while you're shopping, find a stealthy location, hide it behind a vending machine and plug it in or something like that. But it'll help if you have the quick charge capability battery bank and also a quick charge plug for the wall and cord for your battery. But even still, if you're only shopping and then getting out of town, you might not get a full charge on it. So maybe going to eat lunch and plugging it in there too will help, and maybe you won't even need a full charge. Some people consider solar panel chargers instead of a backup battery bank or even in addition to, but in my opinion, you don't really get much for how much they cost and weigh. You're certainly welcome to try it if that's what you'd like to do, but if you think about it, most of the time you're going to be under the green tunnel of trees that is the AT, so you'll be blocking most of the rays of sun. Now, you might take a break and find a clearing where you can have some sun and set up your solar panel, but I don't think you're really going to get much out of those short spurts of time. And then you might even, at that point, when you find a perfect clearing, be dealing with rain or clouds. I prefer the weight of a battery bank. I know the weight that I'm carrying, but I know also the output I'm going to get from it. Cell phones. I have heard some people say, I'm not going to carry a cell phone on trail because I don't want anyone to get in touch with me and I don't want to talk to anybody either. But I don't know if anyone actually does that. It's a good idea to have a cell phone logistically and also in case of emergency. Logistics-wise, if you want to call and reserve a bunk at a hostel or call for a shuttle, if you don't have a cell phone, it's kind of hard to do that. And also in case of emergency, you may have cell service and can call emergency services. And finally, I also use my cell phone for navigation. I like to be able to see right where I'm at in the world and also in reference to the trail. So my cell phone is very much a multi-purpose thing, also for pictures, videos, etc. So how often is there actually cell service on the AT? I'm sure it has gotten better since 2015, but when I was through hiking, if I was up on a mountaintop or in an area that felt like I might have service, you just kind of learn these things when you're out there. But I would say about 70% of the time I thought I might, I actually would. I definitely got service at least, I don't know, once every other day, maybe even once a day for a lot of stretches. But I would say typically you can expect to find service at least once every other day. Some stretches every day. Now, full disclosure here, I have Verizon Wireless as my service provider. I would say that above and beyond, Verizon Wireless has had the best service on average of any cell provider, at least comparing it to people who had other providers. As far as protecting your electronics from rain, I like to keep most of my electronics in a big gallon Ziploc bag. I usually go for the freezer style because it's a little bit more durable, but I eventually switch them up every few towns or so. But that works fine. It's cheap, not super fancy, but it does the trick. Of course, they also make small dry bags that you could use for your electronics, and I do use this for my bigger camera, but I'm just saying you don't have to have a fancy dry bag. You can use Ziploc bags. And don't forget some other little electronics you need to carry along, like various cords for your devices and also wall plugs. It helps if you have a wall plug with multiple USB ports. So if you're in a hostel where there are a lot of people trying to use the outlets, then you're not taking up multiple plugs with all of your devices. You can use one plug and have multiple USB ports, so you can still charge multiple things, but while taking up less room and being considerate of others. And finally, if you want to listen to any podcasts or music, then don't forget some earbuds. Just a word on hiking with headphones. If you're gonna have earbuds in, then I would just keep one in. That way you can listen to your surroundings. My personal experience with having two earbuds in, I was hiking along and I about bumped into a baby bear next to the trail just because I couldn't hear it rustling around and it was coming my way stumbling and I was going its way really fast. And also it's really nice if somebody is trying to pass you on trail, another hiker's behind you, and they can't alert you without being worried about scaring the crap out of you, that they would like to get around. So again, one earbud is much better for safety reasons. Something else I would recommend adding to your gear list is a small repair kit. Thankfully, there weren't a lot of instances where I had to repair gear on trail, but by adding just a few lightweight things to your pack, it can at least help limp you along till you get to town if something tears up. The first item I would definitely take with you is duct tape. For easy storage, I cut about a 6-foot section off of a roll and just roll it on itself. Some people like to wrap it around their trekking pole for quick access later, and you don't have to worry about the rain ruining the duct tape or anything like that. It seems to hold up for folks just fine. But duct tape can salvage many things, such as a hole poked in a water bladder. If you're somebody who uses a pack cover, then a torn pack cover can be mended with some duct tape. I've even heard of people repairing trail runners or boots. If their sole is separating from the shoe, they just wrap it with duct tape. Next, your shelter, specifically tents and tarps, should come with a repair kit, maybe a small piece of material or a patch kit in case there ends up being a hole or a leak in your tent. That way you can repair it in the field. This is something that would be easy to forget and leave at home, so I'm just reminding you, for the negligible amount of weight that item is, it can really save you when you're in trouble. You can also get something like a tear aid kit, but keep in mind that things like duct tape or other materials that are used to patch the tent might make it really difficult for the company to repair it if you were going to send it in for it to be mended. So again, if you can bring what the manufacturer recommends with you on trail, that's the route I would go. In your repair kit, I would include a sleeping pad patch kit if you've got an inflatable sleeping pad. Most of the manufacturers send one of those along with the sleeping pad, but if not, then you can probably find one online, or they may offer one for sale from the company if it wasn't complimentary. But this is definitely something that I would not do without if you've got an inflatable sleeping pad. And finally, I would bring along a needle and some floss. Floss can be dual purpose, obviously for oral hygiene, but also floss is a little bit stronger than thread, so if you've got to repair something like a strap on your pack. And I've even stitched up things like frog togs and my breeches when I bent over and ripped a hole in my crack. But really, if you wanted to bring thread along too, it's not like it weighs that much, but having the ability to stitch something up can definitely help you when you're in a bind. The best place I've found to store my needle so it doesn't end up poking a hole through a bag and escaping or stab me every time I put my hand down in my repair kit, I just tuck it away in the fold of my wad of duct tape. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today on this topic. If you want to watch one big video with all of this information about the AT, but it's split up by timestamps, then you can click right here. Or if you want to watch my through hike of the AT, then you can check that out below. Thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you go. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop those in the comments, and we will see y'all next time.